The morning sun cast long shadows across the golden wheat fields of Haven's Edge as Emma Walsh walked the familiar path to her office. She had been the colony administrator for 8 years now, watching this remote world transform from a barren rock into something beautiful. The air smelled of fresh bread from the bakery and the sweet scent of blooming apple trees that lined the main street. 50,000 humans called this place home, spread across 3 major settlements connected by smooth roads and underground tunnels. They had built everything from scratch with their own hands and determination. The central town of New Hope housed most of the administration buildings, schools, and the medical center. To the north lay the agricultural zones were vast. Fields of crops swayed in the gentle breeze. The southern region contained the research facilities and the small spaceport where supply ships arrived twice a year. Emma stopped at the memorial garden where names of the first colonists were carved into black stone. Her husband Robert's name was there, along with 47 others who had died in the early years from disease and accidents. Those had been hard times, but the survivors had pulled together and built something worth living for. Dr. Marcus Reed was already waiting in her office when she arrived, his tablet filled with data from the latest geological surveys. Marcus had been studying the planet's unique rock formations for 5 years, convinced that Haven's Edge held secrets that could revolutionize human understanding of planetary formation. He was a quiet man in his 50s with gray hair and tired eyes that lit up whenever he talked about his research. "The seismic readings are getting stronger," Marcus said, showing her the colorful graphs on his screen. "The underground river system is more extensive than we thought. These caves could go down for kilometers." Emma nodded as she poured coffee from the machine that had been shipped here from Earth 12 years ago. The coffee was synthetic, but it tasted real enough. "Is it dangerous?" "Not to us," Marcus replied. "But it means this planet has incredible geological activity. The mineral deposits alone could be worth billions to the right people." Captain Tom Bradley knocked on the door before entering. He was a big man with a military bearing, though he had left the Colonial Defense Force to come here with his family. His security team consisted of 24 people, mostly former military who had chosen the quiet life of protecting farmers and scientists. They had basic weapons and 1 patrol ship that was older than most of the colonists. "Morning briefing," Tom said, settling into his chair. "Everything quiet as usual. The Jenkins family reported some missing livestock yesterday, but we found them grazing in the North Valley. Mike Santos finished the perimeter sensor upgrades, so we'll have better early warning if any wildlife gets too close to the settlements." Emma smiled. Wildlife was their biggest security concern. The native creatures were mostly harmless, but the large grazing animals sometimes wandered into the farming areas. The most dangerous thing they had encountered was a pack of wolf-like predators that had been relocated to the far continent. "Any word from the supply ship?" Emma asked. Tom shook his head. "Not due for another 3 months, though I got a message from Colonial Headquarters asking about our population growth projections. Sounds like they're planning to send more families next year." The 3 of them discussed routine matters for another hour: school enrollment numbers, crop yield projections, and the ongoing construction of a new hospital. These were the concerns of peaceful people building a life far from the chaos of the core worlds. Haven's Edge had been deliberately chosen for its isolation, a place where humans could experiment with sustainable living and scientific research without interference. Dr. Reed's assistant Lisa Park joined them for the second half of the meeting. She was the colony's chief engineer, responsible for maintaining the power grid, water systems, and communication networks. Lisa had designed most of the underground infrastructure herself, creating a network of tunnels that connected the major buildings and provided protection from the occasional severe weather. "The quantum communication array is working perfectly," Lisa reported. "We're getting clear signals from the relay stations and the emergency beacon is fully operational. If we ever need help, the message will reach Colonial Headquarters in under 6 hours." Emma felt a familiar sense of pride as she looked at these 3 people. They represented everything good about human expansion into space. Marcus seeking knowledge, Tom protecting the innocent, and Lisa building the future with her own hands. They were ordinary people doing extraordinary things in a place where Earth was just a bright star in the night sky. The meeting ended with plans for the upcoming Harvest Festival. It would be the colony's 15th celebration, marking another year of growth and prosperity. Children who had been born here would perform traditional dances while their parents shared stories of the old world. The festival was a reminder that Haven's Edge was more than just a settlement. It was a home as the others left. Emma stood at her window looking out at the bustling town below. People walked to work, children played in the parks, and the farmers were heading out to tend their fields. The scene was so normal, so peaceful, that she found it hard to believe they were living on the edge of explored space. The communication console chimed with an incoming message from the orbital monitoring station. It was automated data from the sensor network that watched for asteroids and space debris. Emma glanced at the readings and saw nothing unusual. Clear skies, no threats detected. All systems functioning normally. She turned back to her desk and began reviewing the weekly reports from the 3 settlements. Everything was running smoothly, just as it had been for years. The colony was thriving, the people were happy, and the future looked bright. Haven's Edge was proof that humans could build something beautiful anywhere in the galaxy if they worked together. Emma had no way of knowing that, at that very moment, 200 alien warships were moving through hyperspace toward their peaceful world. She had no idea that Fleet Commander Thane of the Ravak Empire had marked Haven's Edge as his next conquest, or that his species viewed humans as weak creatures suitable only for slavery. The morning sun continued to shine on the golden fields, and life went on as it always had, in the last hours before everything changed forever. The Ravak fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Haven's Edge system like a swarm of metal locusts. 200 warships of various sizes formed a massive wall of destruction, their dark hulls bristling with weapons designed to crush entire civilizations. At the center of this armada was the command ship Dominator, where Fleet Commander Thane studied the peaceful world through his tactical displays. Thane was a typical Ravak warrior, standing 3 meters tall with scales that shifted from dark green to black depending on his mood. His species had evolved from reptilian predators on a harsh world where only the strongest survived. For the past 5 centuries, the Ravak Empire had expanded across their region of space by conquering every species they encountered. They saw themselves as the galaxy's rightful rulers, bringing order to weak civilizations through force. Scan results confirmed the intelligence reports, his second-in-command reported. Single inhabited world, minimal defenses, population approximately 50,000. They have basic technology but no military installations. Thane nodded with satisfaction. The Ravak had learned of this human colony through their spy network, a collection of traders and mercenaries who sold information about vulnerable worlds. The humans had seemed like another easy target, a species that had only recently begun expanding into space. Their colonies were scattered and poorly defended, making them perfect for conquest and enslavement. What about their communication capabilities? Thane asked. They have a quantum communication array, but we can jam it before they send any distress signals. The nearest human military base is 47 light-years away. Even if they got a message through, help would take weeks to arrive. The fleet commander smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. Begin the jamming. I want them completely isolated before we attack. Today the Ravak Empire claims another world for our glory. Down on Haven's Edge, the first sign of trouble came from the orbital monitoring station. The automated systems detected massive gravitational disturbances as the Ravak fleet entered the system, triggering emergency alerts throughout the colony. Emma Walsh was reviewing harvest reports when every communication device in her office began screaming warnings. She rushed to the main communication center where Lisa Park was frantically trying to contact the monitoring station, the Quantum communication array was completely dead, showing only static and interference patterns. The local networks were still functioning, but they could not reach beyond the planet's atmosphere. What's happening? Emma demanded. Something's jamming. Our communications, Lisa replied, her face pale with worry. The interference pattern is artificial, definitely not natural phenomena. Someone doesn't want us talking to the outside. Captain Tom Bradley burst through the door, his security team close behind. We've got massive energy signatures in orbit. Whatever's up there, it's big and it's not friendly. The first attack came without warning. Ravak warships descended through the atmosphere like burning meteors, their weapons charging with deadly light. The colony's small patrol ship launched. Desperately from the spaceport, its pilot hoping to get a message to the outside before the jamming became complete. The vessel made it less than a kilometer before 3 Ravak fighters reduced it to flaming debris. Energy beams lanced down from orbit, targeting the power plant, communication facilities, and transportation networks. The carefully built infrastructure that had taken 15 years to construct was destroyed in minutes. Explosions rocked the 3 settlements as the Ravak demonstrated their overwhelming firepower. Emma watched in horror from the emergency command center as her peaceful world erupted in flames. The hospital took a direct hit, killing dozens of patients and medical staff. The school was destroyed while children were still inside. The beautiful town square where festivals had been held for 15 years became a crater of twisted metal and burning debris. We have to evacuate the civilians, Tom shouted over the noise of explosions. Get them to the underground shelters, but the Ravak had planned for this. As soon as the bombardment ended, massive troop transports landed in the 3 settlements. Thousands of Ravak soldiers poured out, armed with advanced weapons and protected by energy shields. They moved with military precision, surrounding key buildings and herding the terrified colonists into designated areas. The humans tried to fight back with hunting rifles and improvised weapons, but their resistance was hopeless. The Ravak had energy weapons that could cut through walls and personal shields that deflected bullets. Within hours, most of the colony's population was captured and forced into hastily constructed prison camps. Emma found herself separated from her staff and thrown into a crowded detention facility with hundreds of other colonists. The Ravak guards were efficient and brutal, using electric prods to keep their prisoners in line. Anyone who showed defiance was beaten or killed as an example to the others. Dr. Marcus Reed was in the same facility, his research notes confiscated and his equipment destroyed. He sat quietly in a corner, watching the alien guards with calculating eyes. Lisa Park was somewhere in the crowd, her engineering skills useless against energy weapons and overwhelming numbers. Captain Tom Bradley had managed to avoid capture with 6 members of his security team. They were hiding in the underground maintenance tunnels that Lisa had designed, using their knowledge of the colony's infrastructure to stay one step ahead of the Ravak search parties. But with only basic weapons and limited supplies, they could do little more than watch their friends and families being enslaved. Fleet Commander Thane established his headquarters in the former Colonial Administration Building, now converted into a Ravak command center. He stood before a holographic display showing the conquered settlements, pleased with the rapid success of his operation. The humans had proven even weaker than expected, offering minimal resistance to his superior. Forces, casualty report, he ordered. Minimal losses, Commander. We lost 3 fighters to atmospheric entry problems and had 12 soldiers injured during the ground assault. The humans killed approximately 40 of our troops before their resistance collapsed. Thane nodded approvingly. And the human casualties? Approximately 12,000 killed during the initial bombardment and ground assault. The remaining 38,000 are secured in detention facilities awaiting transport to the slave markets. The fleet commander turned to his science officer. What about the planet's resources? Rich mineral deposits, excellent agricultural potential, and advanced terraforming technology. The humans have developed some interesting techniques for planetary modification. This world will be a valuable addition to the Empire. Thane composed his victory report for transmission to the Ravak homeworld. Another species conquered, another world claimed for the Empire. The humans had joined the long list of civilizations that had fallen before Ravak might. Soon their survivors would be sold in the slave markets of the Empire, and Haven's Edge would become another Ravak colony, but Fleet Commander Thane had made a crucial error in his assessment. He had assumed that the humans were alone and helpless, cut off from any hope of rescue or revenge. He had not considered that attacking human civilians might provoke a response unlike anything the Ravak Empire had ever encountered. The jamming that had prevented distress signals had only delayed the inevitable, and somewhere in the underground tunnels of Haven's Edge, the seeds of resistance were already beginning to grow. 3 weeks had passed since the Ravak invasion, and the occupiers were beginning to learn that conquering Haven's Edge was easier than controlling it. The underground resistance had started small, with Captain Tom Bradley and his 6 surviving, security personnel conducting hit-and-run attacks from the maintenance tunnels. But as word spread through the prison camps, more colonists began to disappear during work details, slipping away to join the growing rebellion. Dr. Marcus Reed had been the first to realize the potential of the planet's unique geology. During his years of research, he had mapped an extensive network of natural caves and underground rivers that connected all 3 settlements. The Ravak had detected some of these passages, but they had no idea of the true scope of the underground system that honeycombed the planet's crust. The main cavern is 2 kilometers down, Marcus explained to the growing group of rebels gathered in a hidden chamber beneath the ruins of the research facility. The underground river system provides fresh water and transportation between the settlements. We can move unseen through passages that don't show up on their scanners. Lisa Park had escaped from the detention facility during a maintenance work detail, bringing with her crucial knowledge of the colony's infrastructure. She understood every power conduit, water pipe, and communication line that the Ravak were now depending on to maintain their occupation. More importantly, she knew the locations of hidden supply caches and emergency equipment that the invaders had not discovered. "They're using our own power grid," Lisa reported. "But I built redundant systems and backup generators that they don't know about. We can cut power to their command centers and restore it to the detention facilities when we need to." The resistance grew slowly but steadily. Farmers who knew every hidden trail and valley joined the fight. Scientists contributed their knowledge of chemistry and physics to create improvised weapons and explosives. Even children helped by carrying messages and supplies through ventilation shafts too small for adult rebels. Emma Walsh had become the unofficial leader of the resistance, coordinating between different groups and making the hard decisions that came with guerrilla warfare. She had been presumed dead after the administration building was destroyed, but had actually been pulled from the rubble by Tom Bradley's team. Her supposed death gave her freedom to move through the underground network without the Ravak searching. "For her, we can't fight them head-on," Emma told the Council of Resistance leaders. "But we can make their occupation so costly that they'll want to leave. Every day we delay them gives our people in the camps more time to survive." The first major operation came when the rebels discovered that the Ravak were planning to ship 2,000 colonists off-world as slaves. The transport would depart from the main spaceport, heavily guarded and seemingly impossible to attack. But Marcus had been studying the geological surveys, and he had found something interesting. "There's a major fault line running directly under the spaceport," he explained. "If we can trigger the right seismic activity, we can collapse the landing pad and trap their ships." Lisa worked with a team of engineers to modify mining equipment into seismic charges. They would need to place the explosives at precise locations in the underground caves, timing the detonation to maximize the geological instability. It was dangerous work that required them to navigate flooded passages and unstable rock formations. The night before the slave transport was scheduled to depart, the resistance struck. Teams of rebels moved through the cave system, placing charges at calculated points along the fault line. Meanwhile, other groups cut power to the Ravak command centers and launched diversionary attacks on the perimeter of the settlements. Emma watched from a hilltop as the explosions rippled through the ground beneath the spaceport. The carefully timed detonations triggered a localized earthquake that cracked the landing pad and sent the Ravak transport ships sliding into newly formed sinkholes. The geological instability continued for hours, making it impossible for the occupiers to send for replacement vessels, but the victory came at a cost. The Ravak retaliated by executing 100 colonists in the detention camps. Fleet Commander Thane had underestimated the humans initially, but he was learning to take them seriously. He increased security around the prison facilities and began systematic searches of the underground areas. "They're adapting," Tom Bradley reported during a resistance meeting. "They've brought in specialized equipment to scan for our tunnel networks. Some of our safe houses have been discovered." The resistance was forced to go deeper underground, literally and figuratively. They moved their operations to the deepest parts of the cave system, where the Ravak scanners could not penetrate. The conditions were harsh, with limited food and water, but the rebels persevered. Marcus made another crucial discovery during this period. The underground river system was connected to geothermal vents that could provide both power and heat. More importantly, the thermal patterns would mask their heat signatures from Ravak sensors. The resistance established a new base in a massive cavern 3 kilometers below the surface, accessible only through underwater passages. "We're not just hiding," Emma explained to the assembled rebels. "We're building something. This planet is our home, and we're going to fight for it no matter how long it takes." The underground war continued for months, with the resistance learning to strike at the Ravak supply lines and communication networks. They sabotaged mining equipment, poisoned water supplies, and ambushed patrol units in the wilderness. The occupiers found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to know every rock and tree on the planet. Lisa Park had managed to restore limited communication capabilities by tapping into the colony's hardened emergency networks. The quantum communication array was still jammed, but she had found a way to send low-power signals through the planetary ionosphere. It was a desperate hope, but she kept transmitting coded messages into space, hoping that someone might be listening, unknown to the resistance. Their messages were being received. The quantum communication array had been damaged but not destroyed, and Lisa's modifications had created a narrow transmission window that the Ravak jamming could not completely block. Somewhere in space, automated relay stations were recording the faint signals and forwarding them to human colonial headquarters. Fleet Commander Thane was growing increasingly frustrated with the occupation. What should have been a simple resource extraction operation had become a prolonged military campaign. His forces were suffering daily casualties from rebel attacks, and the productivity of the human slave labor was far below expectations. "Perhaps we should simply exterminate the remaining population," his second-in-command suggested. "Dead humans cannot rebel." Thane considered this option but rejected it. The Ravak Empire needed slaves, and healthy human workers were valuable commodities. More importantly, his reputation depended on successfully completing the conquest. Admitting failure would mean disgrace and possibly execution. "Double the security patrols," he ordered. "I want these tunnels mapped and sealed. The human resistance will be crushed, no matter what it takes." But deep beneath the surface of Haven's Edge, in caverns that had existed for millions of years, the human resistance was growing stronger. They had learned to fight in ways that the Ravak had never encountered, using the planet itself as a weapon. The underground war was just beginning, and the occupiers were about to discover that sometimes the hunted become the hunters. The galaxy was about to learn that attacking human civilians was not just a tactical error. It was a fundamental misunderstanding of what humanity was capable of when pushed to the edge of extinction. The survivors of Haven's Edge were no longer just colonists trying to build a peaceful life. They had become something harder, something the Ravak Empire had never faced before, and they were preparing to teach their enemies a lesson that would echo across the stars. The message reached Colonial Defense Headquarters on New Terra after traveling through 17 relay stations across 47 light-years of space. It was fragmentary and corrupted, barely recognizable as a distress signal, but the automated systems identified it as coming from Haven's Edge within hours. The full horror of the situation became clear to Admiral Kate Sullivan as her intelligence teams worked to decode the broken transmissions. 50,000 civilians under attack by an unknown hostile force, the intelligence officer reported. The signals are weak and intermittent, but we're getting consistent reports of orbital bombardment and ground invasion. The colony's defenses have been overwhelmed. Admiral Sullivan had spent 30 years in the Colonial Defense Force, fighting pirates and settling disputes between human colonies. She had never faced a situation like this. An alien species had attacked human civilians without provocation, committing what could only be described as an act of war against all humanity. "How long ago did this happen?" she asked. "The attack began 4 months ago. The signals we're receiving are from survivors operating some kind of emergency communication system. They're still alive, but barely." The admiral stood before the star. Map in the command center studying the location of Haven's Edge. It was far from the core worlds, in a region of space that had been considered safe for colonization. The attack had come from an unknown direction, by an enemy that humanity had never encountered. What do we know about the attackers? The survivors call them the Ravak, reptilian species, highly militaristic, using advanced technology. Intelligence suggests they operate a slave-based empire in the outer spiral regions. This appears to be their first contact with human space. Admiral Sullivan felt something cold settle in her stomach. First contact should have been a moment of wonder and diplomacy, not the slaughter of innocent civilians. The Ravak had chosen to introduce themselves to humanity through violence and conquest, and they were about to learn the consequences of that decision. "Send word to all fleet commanders," she ordered. "I want every available ship prepared for immediate deployment. This is no longer a rescue mission, it's a war." The response was swift and unprecedented. Human colonies across 3 star systems began mobilizing their defense forces. Merchant vessels were converted into troop transports and supply ships. Civilian volunteers lined up at recruitment centers, demanding the chance to serve. The attack on Haven's Edge had awakened something primal in the human psyche, a protective instinct that transcended political boundaries and personal differences. Commander David Foster had been running cargo between the outer colonies when the call came. His ship, the Endeavor, was a converted freighter, armed with mining lasers and cargo holds full of industrial equipment. Within days, he found himself commanding a squadron of similarly modified vessels, all crewed by volunteers determined to rescue their fellow humans. "We're not military," David told his mixed crew of miners, engineers, and farmers. "But we're human, and humans don't abandon their own." The Liberation Fleet that assembled at the Proxima staging area was unlike anything in human history. Military vessels formed the core of the force, but they were surrounded by hundreds of civilian ships that had been hastily converted for combat. The fleet represented every human colony, every walk of life, united by the simple principle that an attack on one was an attack on all. Admiral Sullivan stood on the bridge of her flagship, the heavy cruiser Valiant, watching the largest human fleet ever assembled prepare for battle. 250 ships of all sizes and configurations, carrying 40,000 troops and enough firepower to level a planet. But they were not going to Haven's Edge to conquer, they were going to liberate. "All ships report ready for hyperspace." "Jump," her navigation officer announced. "Signal the fleet," Admiral Sullivan ordered. "Today we teach the galaxy what happens when you attack human civilians." The fleet jumped to hyperspace in waves, their destination the Haven's Edge system, and whatever remained of the Ravak occupation force. But the admiral had learned from intelligence reports that the Ravak Empire was vast, with hundreds of worlds and thousands of ships. The liberation of Haven's Edge would be just the beginning of a larger conflict. On Haven's Edge, the underground resistance had no knowledge of the approaching fleet. They continued their guerrilla war against the Ravak occupiers, slowly wearing down the enemy through constant attacks and sabotage. The alien forces had been reinforced twice, but each new unit found itself facing an enemy that seemed to know every hiding place and secret passage on the planet. Dr. Marcus Reed had made another crucial discovery in the deep caverns. The planet's geological instability could be weaponized on a massive scale. By triggering eruptions in the right locations, they could create electromagnetic disturbances that would interfere with Ravak ship operations. It was a desperate plan. That could destroy much of the surface infrastructure, but it might give them a chance to strike back at the orbital forces. The risk is enormous, Marcus explained to the Resistance leadership. If we miscalculate, we could trigger a volcanic event that would make the planet uninhabitable. Emma Walsh looked at the faces of the rebels gathered in the deep cavern. They were thin and exhausted, driven by pure determination to continue fighting. Above them, 30,000 of their friends and family members remained in Ravak detention camps, waiting for liberation or death. What are our chances if we do nothing? She asked. The Ravak will eventually find all our hiding places, Tom Bradley replied. They've brought in specialized equipment and more troops. We might last another few months, but eventually they'll hunt us down. The decision was made to proceed with the geological attack. Teams of engineers and miners began placing charges at critical points in the planet's crust, following Marcus's calculations to trigger a controlled seismic event. The work was dangerous, requiring them to navigate flooded passages and unstable rock formations while avoiding Ravak patrols. Lisa Pock had continued her efforts to restore communication capabilities, finally managing to boost the signal strength of their emergency transmissions. Unknown to the Resistance, their messages were now being received clearly by the approaching Liberation fleet. Admiral Sullivan was coordinating with the survivors, planning a combined assault that would strike the Ravak from above and below. Simultaneously, the Resistance is stronger than we expected, the Admiral's communications officer reported. They've maintained organized operations for months and have detailed intelligence on enemy positions. Fleet Commander Thane was growing increasingly paranoid as the Resistance continued to strike at his forces. He had requested additional reinforcements from the Ravak homeworld, but the response had been disappointing. The Empire was engaged in conflicts on multiple fronts, and Haven's Edge was considered a minor problem that should have been resolved months ago. The humans are like parasites, he complained to his officers. They hide in dark places and emerge to bite us when we least expect it. Perhaps the Empire was wrong to classify them as a weak species. But Thane had no idea that his problems were about to become much worse. The Liberation fleet was approaching the edge of the Haven's Edge system, and long-range sensors were beginning to detect the massive human armada. The Ravak had expected an easy conquest, but they were about to face an enemy that had been preparing for war since the first distress signal reached human space. The underground Resistance received a coded message through their emergency communication system. It was brief but unmistakable. Liberation fleet approaching. Prepare for coordinated assault. Hold position and await signal. Emma Walsh felt tears in her eyes as she read the message. After months of hopeless fighting, help was finally coming. The galaxy was about to learn that attacking human civilians was not just a tactical error. It was a declaration of war against the most determined species in known space. The Battle of Haven's Edge was about to begin, and the Ravak Empire would never be the same. The Liberation fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Haven's Edge system like avenging angels, their ships gleaming in the light of the distant star. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood on the bridge of the Valiant, watching her tactical displays as 250 human vessels spread into battle formation. Across the system, Fleet Commander Thane's occupation force was scrambling to respond to the massive human armada that had appeared without warning. Enemy fleet composition? Sullivan asked her tactical officer. 187 Ravak vessels, mostly cruisers and destroyers. They're moving to intercept us, but they seem surprised by our numbers, the Admiral smiled grimly. The Ravak had expected to face a small rescue force, not the largest human fleet ever assembled. Every colony in human space had contributed ships and personnel to this liberation effort, united by the simple principle that an attack on human civilians demanded overwhelming response. Signal the Resistance. Tell them to begin the geological attack in 30 minutes. We need those orbital defenses disrupted before we can move in close. Deep beneath the surface of Haven's Edge, Dr. Marcus Reed was making final adjustments to the seismic charges that would trigger the most ambitious military operation in human history. The Resistance had spent weeks placing explosives at critical points along the planet's fault lines, following his calculations to create a controlled earthquake that would interfere with Ravak ship operations. The electromagnetic pulse from the seismic activity should disrupt their shields and navigation systems, Marcus explained to Emma Walsh and Tom Bradley. It won't destroy them, but it will give the fleet a chance to close distance and engage. Emma nodded, thinking of the 30,000 colonists still held in Ravak detention camps. They had one chance to save their people, and everything depended on perfect timing between the surface resistance and the orbital fleet. All teams report ready, Tom announced. We can trigger the geological attack on your command. The space battle began as the two fleets closed to weapons range. The Ravak opened fire first, their energy weapons creating brilliant flashes against the human ship's shields. But Admiral Sullivan had learned from the intelligence reports, and her fleet was prepared for the alien tactics. Multiple attack vectors, she ordered. Don't let them concentrate their fire on any single formation. The human fleet split into smaller groups, attacking from different angles and using their superior numbers to overwhelm the Ravak defenses. Commander David Foster led his squadron of converted civilian ships against the enemy's left flank, their mining lasers and improvised weapons proving surprisingly effective against alien hull armor. Remember, David transmitted to his volunteers, we're not just fighting for Haven's Edge. We're fighting for every human colony that might face this threat in the future. Fleet Commander Thane watched in growing alarm as his forces were systematically overwhelmed by the human attack. The enemy ships were diverse and unpredictable, using tactics that didn't match any known military doctrine. Some appeared to be civilian vessels, but they fought with a ferocity that matched their military counterparts. How many ships do they have? He demanded. At least 250, Commander. They're using coordinated assault patterns that suggest extensive planning. This is not a rescue mission, it's a full-scale invasion. The turning point came when the Resistance triggered their geological weapon. The seismic charges detonated in perfect sequence, creating a massive earthquake that rippled across the planet's surface. The electromagnetic pulse generated by the geological disturbance reached into space, disrupting the Ravak ship systems and leaving them vulnerable to the human fleet. Now, Admiral Sullivan ordered, all ships, close range, and engage. The human fleet surged forward, taking advantage of the Ravak confusion to close to point-blank range. The battle became a desperate melee as ships from both sides engaged in close combat. But the humans had overwhelming numbers and the advantage of surprise, and the Ravak formation began to collapse. On the planet's surface, the Resistance emerged from their underground hiding places to attack the disrupted Ravak ground forces. The earthquake had damaged the alien command centers and communication networks, leaving the occupation troops confused and isolated. Emma Walsh led teams of rebels in coordinated attacks on the detention camps, fighting to free their imprisoned friends and family members. The camps are lightly guarded, Tom Bradley reported. The Ravak are pulling their forces back to defend the spaceports. But the Liberation Fleet was already targeting the spaceports with precision strikes. The combined assault from space and surface was devastating, and the Ravak occupation began to crumble. Fleet Commander Thane found himself trapped between the human fleet above and the planet-wide rebellion below. We need to evacuate, his second-in-command urged. The situation is hopeless. Thane looked at his tactical displays, seeing his forces being destroyed piecemeal by an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once. The humans had turned Haven's Edge into a trap, using the planet itself as a weapon against the occupation force. It was a level of strategic thinking that he had not expected from the species the Empire had classified as primitive. Signal the retreat, he ordered. All ships abandon the surface forces and prepare for hyperspace jump, but Admiral Sullivan had anticipated this move. As the surviving Ravak ships tried to flee, they found themselves facing a wall of human vessels that had positioned themselves between the aliens and the hyperspace jump point. The Liberation Fleet had not come to Haven's Edge to drive off the invaders. They had come to destroy them completely. No survivors, the Admiral transmitted to all human ships. The Ravak Empire needs to understand the consequences of attacking human civilians. The Battle of Haven's Edge ended with the complete destruction of the Ravak occupation force. Fleet Commander Thane's ship was among the last to be destroyed, its hull cracking under the combined fire of a dozen human vessels. The few alien survivors were captured and held for trial, while the human fleet began the process of liberating the detention camps and providing aid to the survivors. Emma Walsh stood in the ruins of New Hope, watching human shuttles land with medical supplies and emergency equipment. The liberation had cost thousands of lives, but 30,000 colonists had been saved from slavery or death. The town would be rebuilt, stronger than before, as a symbol of human determination. "We did it," Tom Bradley said, his voice filled with exhaustion and relief. "We actually did it." Dr. Marcus Reed was already planning the reconstruction effort, using his geological knowledge to design better defenses for the colony. The seismic weapon had proven that human ingenuity could turn any world into a fortress if necessary. But the victory at Haven's Edge was just the beginning. News of the battle spread through human space like wildfire, and the galaxy's other powers began to take notice. The Centauri Federation, the Hegemony, and the Trade Collective all sent observers to study the aftermath of the conflict. Ambassador Rachel Torres addressed the Galactic Council 6 months later, representing humanity's new position in galactic politics. The other species, who had viewed humans as newcomers and potential victims, now recognized them as a formidable power that demanded respect. The Ravak Empire learned a hard lesson, she told the assembled delegates. Attacking human civilians doesn't just mean war with one colony or one fleet. It means war with all of humanity, and we fight with an intensity that makes us dangerous to provoke. The Ravak Empire, having lost their entire expeditionary force, sued for peace and agreed to pay reparations to the Haven's Edge survivors. Other aggressive species in the galaxy reconsidered their expansion plans, knowing that humanity would respond to any attack on their civilians with overwhelming force. Haven's Edge was rebuilt as a model colony with advanced defenses and a memorial to those who had died in the invasion. The techniques developed during the guerrilla war became standard training for all human colonial defense forces, and the planet became a symbol of human resilience. The galaxy had learned that peaceful humans were not weak humans. They were simply humans who had chosen not to fight. When that choice was taken away, when their families and homes were threatened, they became something that no empire could conquer. The attack on Haven's Edge had been intended to demonstrate human vulnerability, but instead it had revealed their greatest strength, the willingness to sacrifice everything for each other. The colonists of Haven's Edge had earned humanity a permanent place among the galaxy's major powers through their courage and sacrifice. They had proven that humans were not just another species to be conquered, but a force of nature that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of strength and determination. The Ravak Empire had made the galaxy's worst mistake, and the consequences would echo through the stars for generations to come.